Welcome to the meeting, which is has this titled Strange Death of Jeremy Corbyn, which obviously refers to the recently disastrous election for the Labour Party in England, Britain. So we've got Liam McQuaid is here from the Bethnal Green Labour Party. That's how he's introducing himself. So from the inside of the Labour Party. So
okay.
Right. Carry on.
Okay.
Then Liam will speak for about 20 minutes and then we'll open up.
Okay. So I've been asked to point out that Corbyn isn't actually dead. I mean, okay, he's getting on a wee bit, but he's an advertisement for the joys of a vegan and teetotal lifestyle. Now, I rejoined the Labour Party after a long period outside about 5 years ago. I had a couple of pints and it was the anniversary of Rosa Luxemburg's death, so I asked her ghost for forgiveness and sent off my application form. And I'll be saying something about what life is like inside the Labour Party as I go through this. But what I want to do though is set that British election result, which was absolutely catastrophic, in a more general context. Right. The first is the nature of the extended period. Yeah, you can make a choice. Was the last successful revolution in Vietnam? Was it in Nicaragua? But the hard fact is that since the late 70s, early 80s, the left internationally has been on the defensive and has been rolled back. And if you look at the evolution of politics in the early part of this century, you've got Modi, Orban, Trump, Putin, Erdogan, Duterte, that whole axis of hard right nationalist politicians. And one of my arguments is going to be that the Johnson victory is the British expression of that reactionary nationalist project. Now, I think there was a potential moment when this could have been turned around, and this might be controversial with this audience, and that was in 2015 when the Greek working class voted by a large majority, 61% to 39%, to reject the bailout proposed by European capitalism. And Syriza capitulated. Right? Syriza had come to power on the basis of extremely high levels of working class mobilisation. It had a strong mandate from the referendum result, and it rolled over. And actually, what I found out subsequently was they hadn't even prepared for the potential of a break with the European Union, to the extent that they've not even got a couple of art students to go away and design what an independent currency might look like. And so that was the most recent major setback, I think, for the European left. But then very quickly after that, and this was probably as much of a surprise for Corbyn and McDonnell as it was for anybody else, there was a reaction against Blairism, the Labour right, which led to Corbyn and McDonnell getting elected to the leadership and deputy leadership of the Labour Party. And that resulted in a huge influx of people into Labour. The membership still stands on the right side of 500,000. And when the right challenged Corbyn in 2016 with Owen Smith as a potential leader, one of the most unprepossessing people I've ever been in the same room as, what happened was that Corbyn's victory in that election was even more decisive. When the 2017 election was called, I think the virtually universal reaction on the left and inside the Labour Party was, oh God, this is going to be a complete disaster. Turned out it wasn't. Corbyn increased the Labour vote by a third, and that transformed the situation for a bit inside the party. However, it was very, very short-lived, and the momentum that created, however, petered out very, very quickly. So that in the 2019 election, what you saw was a massive victory for English nationalism and the xenophobic hard right. As I said at the start, this election was the English expression of what we've seen in Turkey, India, Australia, and so on. And I think you can reasonably say it's as significant a defeat for the British working class as the victory of Margaret Thatcher was in 1983, when she won her second term. What the Tories managed to do was hoover up all the UKIP votes, all the Brexit Party votes. They got 43.5% of the electorate who voted to vote for them. They gained 66 seats. By contrast, Labour lost 7.8% of its vote over the previous election. It won 32% of the vote, and it lost 42 seats. The manifesto on which Labour had fought had a lot of good stuff in it. If that manifesto had been implemented, I think working class English people, and I'll say something about the definition of working class English people in a moment, working class English people would have seen a rapid improvement in the quality of their daily lives in terms of healthcare spending, education spending, and everything else. But none of this connected, because the issue at the heart of the election was Brexit. The Tory campaign, it was almost a caricature of an election manifesto. They would only ever speak about one thing. They were throwing out a couple of promises which were utterly meaningless. It was Brexit, 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 and that won the election for them. And Labour paid a heavy price for refusing to take a firm position in opposition to Brexit. The most significant mass movement that we've seen in British politics in the last several years has been the movement against Brexit. It was routinely, it pulled out demonstrations of more than 1 million. It was organising, these demonstrations were organised by people in small towns and villages autonomously, right? For all people drone on about Alistair Campbell and Peter Mandelson and all the rest of it, their actual input into mobilising people to come on the demonstrations was negligible, absolutely negligible. People were taken to the streets because they saw some benefits of being in the European Union. They were explicitly rejecting English nationalism. And for those on the left who see something positive in Brexit, the contrast between the social composition and the political makeup of the pro-Remain and the pro-Leave events couldn't be starker. Every pro-Leave thing was an orgy of far-right English reaction. All the Remain events, people were walking around in those silly European Union berets and all the rest of it. It was muddled, but it was a rejection of the reactionary project. Now, the Labour vote did split two ways, there's no denying that. About 800,000 Labour voters switched to the Tories, and that's not a small number. On the other hand, the Lib Dems gained about an estimated 1.1 million votes from Labour. And their principal issue in the election campaign was their opposition to Brexit. The Greens also attracted another 340,000 votes, and Scotland's a bit different, but the SNP pulled in an additional 250,000 votes. So Labour shed a lot of Remain votes. And one of the reasons it did that was it tried to straddle both sides of the argument. Well, if one side of the argument is racist nationalism and the other side isn't, there's really no point trying to find the common ground between those 2 points. Right? You have to go in hard against the racist nationalism, and Labour refused to do that. Now, looking at what was happening inside the party, it was obvious right from the get-go that the Labour right could never be reconciled to a left leadership. And Corbyn has had a principled history of being internationalist. Him and McDonnell were rolling up at picket lines at 6 o'clock in the morning all over London, all through their political careers. However, British capitalism, I don't think, saw them as existential threats. This was less social democracy of a sort that Harold Wilson would have been comfortable with. But I think what the Corbyn supporters didn't really appreciate, that there was a significant strand of opinion, particularly in the parliamentary Labour Party, particularly among councillors and council leaders, that could not be reconciled to a principled internationalist Labour leadership, and were as hostile to that leadership as many Tories. So from the moment Corbyn and McDonnell became leader, they were faced with levels of character assassination which I think are unprecedented in recent British political history. The Daily Mail, the paper which in the 1930s was actively supporting the black shirts, the Daily Mail, the paper which is the go-to read for every English racist nationalist, was calling Corbyn a liar and an anti-Semite. And not insignificant numbers of Labour MPs and Liberal commentators were jumping on this bandwagon. Yeah, the character assassination was relentless. But there were a number of weaknesses in the Corbyn project, and part of that's historical. It goes back to this big defeat of the British working class movement. For the best part of this century and the 90s, most socialists would have preferred a Labour government to a Tory government, of course, but it was hard to find too many socialists who were actively enthusiastic about the Labour Party, which meant that the parliamentary party, it was recruited from quite a narrow social base. There's all these characters, studied politics at university, become special advisors, hadn't had jobs in the real world, had joined during the Blairite period, and Corbyn and McDonnell found it very, very hard to have a significant cohort of MPs who'd actively support them. And one of the things that they failed to do, maybe they decided that this was an unwinnable fight, was to confront these people head on. I mean, by contrast, Johnson's purge of the Tory dissidents was much more brutal, and it turns out to have been very, very effective. Right? He's recreated the party in his own image in a way that Corbyn and McDonnell just were never able to, never tried to. And the only tool that they had to hand, which might have allowed them to do this, was momentum, which is solely controlled by a character called John Landsman, which is quite good when there's a leadership campaign or stuff like that, in organising events, organising phone banks and so on. But what it's absolutely futile for is structuring some sort of political discussion, structuring political interventions into the life of the party. And in its day-to-day life, it's mainly used as an umbrella for groups of local activists on the Labour left to meet up. But the political level of the average Labour Party member is very low. I think most of them didn't quite grasp that what was happening inside the party was actually class war rather than just a bit of a factional fight. Now, one of the most peculiar aspects of the Corbyn period has been the success in making the allegations of anti-Semitism stick. Right. I mean, most people on the Labour left were scratching their heads to try and remember examples of anti-Semitism that they'd experienced. All the evidence is that the Tories are the most natural home of racists, anti-Semites, Islamophobes and homophobes. And in all my years in the British left, I've got no recollection of an anti-Semitic comment being expressed. Now, that's not to say in a party of 500,000-600,000 people, you don't get individuals with bizarre ideas who should be chucked out of decent society. But the notion that anti-Semitism is large-scale and prevalent in the British Labour Party, it doesn't match my experience. It doesn't match the experience of anybody that I know. And I've got a fairly wide range of contacts inside it. But it's stuck. It's stuck. And Labour MPs who knew that 99.99% of these allegations were completely unfounded went along with it. Corbyn and McDonnell didn't push back, and right, there are reports that they face significant opposition from inside the shadow cabinet to push it back too hard. And I think this relates back to that point I was making. Yeah, that relates back to this point I was making about how narrow the pool was that they had to draw from. They didn't have very many people who'd be willing to go up front and say, we will drive anti-Semites out of the party, however, bring us the evidence, the allegations were accepted, whatever their absurdity. So let's put it to an end. Brexit managed to split the British working class on the basis of racism. Now, let's go back to this thing of what is the British working class. In the big cities, so in the area where I live, the local Labour MP was vigorously anti-Brexit. She increased her majority to 35,000. 35,000 majority for a militantly anti-Brexit Labour MP in a constituency which voted 65% to remain. The local school population is about 40%, 45% Bangladeshi. Household incomes are some of the lowest in the country. All the big metropolitan centres returned similar sorts of numbers in the referendum in their rejection of Brexit. The big metropolitan centres, by and large, voted to return Labour MPs. Where the story is different is in the smaller towns, in the deindustrialised areas, and there the English working class looks rather different compared to what it looks like in the big cities. Just to give an anecdote, in August just gone, I went to a town called Great Yarmouth. Apparently in the Middle Ages, it was one of the most prosperous harbours in England on account of the wood trade. It's still a fairly vibrant seaside resort for people who like the bracing winds of the North Sea. And it was packed, it was packed. But at certain points, there were more people in mobility scooters than walking down the streets. Right, the families, you could see this was their 2-week big holiday, and they gave that impression, most of them, of bumping along on the minimum wage or casual work and all the rest of it. But the number of cross Flag of St George t-shirts, tattoos, Union Jacks around the place was staggering. This section of the English working class voted in direct contradiction of its own material interests and supported the Brexit project. So it was some sort of English national identity. The situation was very, very different in Scotland, which by and large working class voters supported what they perceived as a leftist social democratic party. And just to conclude on the current leadership race, so we're down to Starmer, Nandy, and Rebecca Long-Bailey. And Michael Rosen, children's writer, he was the children's laureate. He wrote something last night about a hustings at which these 3 candidates spoke, and what he said was quite staggering. He got Rebecca Long-Bailey, who is described as the continuity Corbyn candidate, to say that describing Israeli actions towards the Palestinians as racist. is anti-Semitic. So it's perfectly legitimate to say the Canadian state is racist. It's perfectly legitimate to say the French state is racist, the British state is racist, the Italian state is racist. You're not allowed to say that the Israeli state is racist. And that's the left candidate. So it's unsurprising that the enthusiasm, and it was very, very real, it was a very, very exciting thing to be a part of, that the Corbyn and McDonnell leadership challenges generated is absent this time round. And you know what you see at the meetings at which local constituencies decide which candidate to support is that the right have recovered. They've retained all their organisational capacity, and depending where you are, the favoured candidate of the Blairites seems to be Lisa Nandy. If memory serves, I think she said earlier this week that we really shouldn't criticise Blair too much for the Iraq War. For what it's worth, my personal prediction is that Starmer is going to win. He seems to be quite successfully building this alliance to the Labour right, and significant numbers of people who've previously supported Corbyn and McDonnell think he's not that bad actually. And I think one observation I'll make about Starmer is, if it hadn't been for the Corbyn blip, that unexpected event, nobody would be raising an eyebrow that you had Miliband, somebody else, and then Starmer become the leader. Right. The question then becomes is how far will the new leadership concede to the right? How far will the left be successful at preserving some of the modest gains of Corbynism? The main one of which is, I think, still a reasonably active mass membership party in which socialists have significant space to organise.
Thanks, Liam. That's great. So I'll